All right. Hi, everyone. We'll just give a few minutes for others to join, and then we'll kick off. Thanks for joining. Just give another minute for folks to join if they're shifting virtual environments, and then we'll kick off. All right. I don't want to keep people waiting, so we're going to kick off. So thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. I'm Kelly Kobe. I'm a scientist at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute. And the hat I'm wearing today is one of the co-leads of the Canadian Reproducibility Network. So the Canadian Reproducibility Network is relatively new, and we're trying to secure more funding to do more great outreach and initiatives like the one we have today. So far, we've done a number of sessions around responsible research assessment and research impact. But today we're shifting focus a little bit. So we're fortunate to have Dr. Gabriel Pelletier from the TOSI, Tenenbaum Open Science Institution. And he'll be speaking about embedding open science into research culture and the great work that the Neuro has done. So certainly for me, when I returned to Canada after sort of studying and working abroad, the Neuro was sort of Canada's flagship institution when it came to open science. And it's been great to see over the years the I think growth and impact that they've had, not just locally at their institution, but across Canada more broadly, sort of growing open science culture within neurosciences in particular. So in terms of kicking off, I'll note that I'm calling in today from the unceded traditional territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. If others would like to do a land acknowledgement to where they're calling in the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. I think that it's been really amazing to see this sort of informal group, this community of practice growing, and really excited to hear what Gabriel has to say. So I'll pass it over to him. He's got about 40 minutes to take us through his presentation. And then at the end, we'll do a Q&A and discussion. If there are questions throughout, please feel free to use the Q&A and chat, and we'll address them as soon as the session, the talk itself is over. All right, so over to you, Gabriel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks, Mamoon, for organizing all of this and exchanging emails and keeping me in check. I am at McGill University at the Montreal Neuro, and McGill's main campus sits on land that historically and still serves as a meeting and exchange place for a few Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe and Anishinaabe Nation, and a few others. So that's for my own land acknowledgement. Yeah, so I'll talk about what we've been up to since, I suppose, 2016 at the Neuro and with the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute. I'll talk a little bit about research evaluation, but mostly about kind of the general framework that we've been implementing to implement open science in research institutions, specifically in the neuroscience mental health space. So let me switch to these slides. So for, I should start with a brief intro of what TOSI is and what we do, what the mission is. So I'd say TOSI has two main missions, two main purposes. And so the first, in orange here on the slide, is to use the Neuro as a living lab for open science institutionally, so to speak. So establish best practices, developing programs, infrastructure to support the implementation of open science. So basically what happens when you bring a whole institute together, throw some money at it, and expertise to make open science happen. So we tried a lot of things, which I will talk about today. And then the second part of our mission is to export that model to other institutions and centers across neuroscience, in neuroscience and mental health institutes across Canada first, and then slowly, maybe not so slowly, expanding to international sites in neuroscience as well. So first thing we do when we embark on that journey with the research institutes is to adopt a framework, basically open science principles. So we all know the research community and researchers, staff, leadership kind of all go into the same directions. And these principles are developed not in a really top-down fashion, but really as a both like sort of top-down and bottom-up way, meaning that the community has to be on board. These principles get tweaked by the community and adopted by the institutions with kind of seal of approval from the university at higher levels as well. And so for us at the Neuro, our principles can be summarized in four main bits. The first is kind of the simplest one, sharing of research output. So that encourages researchers and the institution itself to share research outputs defined very broadly, publication, code, data, and so on, as openly as possible and as early as possible, while of course acknowledging that not everything can be made open as early. Then this open partnership bit, which is basically guiding our various partnerships, whether it be with industry, other academic, internal or external collaborations, that when we do embark into such collaborations, that we strive to have all of these research outputs and other principles apply to the partnerships as well. So it's not just an internal sort of guiding principle, but we should try to expand, kind of leverage our many collaborations to expand open science forward that way. Open intellectual property is an important and was the thorniest one at first, although now the things are a bit easier in that sense. But basically, at the Neuro, we took a strong stance, saying that essentially, we researchers should not seek restrictive intellectual property on research outputs or discovery at this early stage of the research. So, really pushing for efficiency of knowledge flow and exchange rather than restrictions. And the last one is to respect researchers and participants' autonomy in this whole open science journey, meaning researchers, we recognize academic freedom and that researchers can embark more or less in open science, and that is fine, although we encourage it, of course. And research participants and patients do not have necessarily to consent to data sharing or all sorts of open science activities, and that should not impede care or any other opportunities to participate in research. So these are the broad principles, and all that we build in terms of programs and initiative activities have those, we have these at the back of our minds when we build them. I should say, I'll just go back one slide. I should say, so TOSI has two main mission. My work specifically, I'm the Open Science Alliance Officer, and so I work particularly on the purple side, so on the building partnership with other institutes, which I'll talk a bit more about later. And we do have other staff members that work on the neuro side of things. And so a lot of what I will present today is not me leading or organizing them. It's a lot of my team, which I will shout out to at the end of this presentation. But I am, of course, kind of day-to-day involved in it as well. As we're such a small team, everybody's involved in everything. This slide, I thought it was important to mention it. We are funded almost entirely by philanthropy. So the TOSI was made possible by a $20 million endowment back in 2016 by the Larry and Judy Tannenbaum Family Foundation. And it was quite a big deal at the time. We had ex-premier Justin Trudeau in the building, and on the slide you can see Guy Rouleau at the far right, the co-founder of TOSI, along with Larry Tannenbaum, and the ex-president principal of McGill University as well. And so that's what we're running. That's what we're funding mostly is. And we also have other donations that we seek and grant opportunities to, let's say, Brain Canada for specific platforms or infrastructure, and then other philanthropy that are willing to chip in because of this open science vision and stance. I want to spend a minute on this endowment part of things because I didn't know what that was. What I started, like I didn't know about how finances work really, but so this $20 million that we got is not just like a 20 million in the bank and we can do a lot real fast with it. It's an endowment, so meaning every year we get a return on investment from that money that sits in a fund forever, which is really important when we talk about culture change and open science, because that means this was really the sustainability and long-term vision right from the onset. Maybe we could have done some things faster and maybe something more impressive and more impactful more rapidly with a full huge grant of $20 million to hire a big team and all that stuff. But that runs down pretty fast, and then you're left with nothing or uncertainty. And so this model has the advantage of us running onto sustainable funds. And that's important from when I'll talk about the partnerships that we built later as well. So I'll talk a bit about why we targeted, why TOSI worked at this institutional level for open science, and why we worked with research centers and not sort of different levels of organization. So here I'm presenting this, well, I'm showing the pyramid of culture change is now a classic in the open science sphere area. As for originally from the Center for Open Science. And it lays out the different levels of sort of things that are important to consider and maybe even necessary for a culture change or new behavior to be implemented. So this is a model, probably not perfect, probably not applicable to all sort of behavioral culture change, but and I'll come to that a bit later as well. But at the base of the pyramid, if you want someone to do something, it should be first possible with maybe the proper infrastructure that's in place. People should be able to use that infrastructure, implement that behavior through, proper user experience or training support staff, for instance, so make it easier. There should be some community around it, around the behavior, around the thing you want to implement for it to seem normative. That can happen through events, maybe grants to build teams around a common goal. Then a behavior should be rewarded, with incentives to encourage folks to do it. And then it can be required, it should be required through policies, right, mandates. So in the TOSI models and at the Neuro, we work at all of these levels, except for the very top one. So as I mentioned, researchers are not required, or there's no mandate for them to do open science or share things, but everything's in place for them to want to do it and be able to do it. And so, maybe some of you were at the Canadian Conference on Open Science and Open Scholarship early in October, so there might be a bit of repetition to what I presented there. I hope it's fine, but it's a longer talk now, so I'll add more to it. But I presented to this idea then, so it's kind of with the pyramid in mind that I just showed. I like to reflect on what a research institute is and what it's made of, and I hope that things will sort of come together with that in mind. So at a research center or research institute, you've got a lot of components that are really affecting research, all sort of interacting and coming together. You have people, researchers, staff, administrators. You got equipment, infrastructure, maybe shared servers, maybe shared, microscopes in our case, or some, platforms, which usually also has staff associated with that to onboard people and support them in using them. You've got generally some sort of events, community comes together with talks, seminars, lunch and learns type of thing. The most lucky of us also have communications staff, dedicated communications personnel to move some information around, make sure everybody's aware of everything. Some of those institutes also have some sort of awards, grants, fellowships, internal competitions, sometimes with money, sometimes with mostly like recognition, not necessarily monetary. And to organize all of this, there's usually an organizational structure with some direction, scientific direction, some committees. And what's really interesting with that research institute, the organization type of thing, is that all of these people generally at the research institutes are, as part of the organization structure, all are the very same people that are involved in these platforms, in this training, in the communications, and in the research. So you've got sort of this very kind of direct connection in how things are organized, really close to the actual research. And so when all of this works together, it's not just this bunch of disconnected pieces, but it really works as a research system in a coherent way. And when that happens, and you've got sort of a research culture going on, it's relatively easy to tweak some parameters of that system to make it work in a slightly or radically different way. In our case, a more open way, and to introduce open science in that system. And so that's really how it's kind of a unique way. That's why White closely targeted this level of organization to implement open science and thought it was very promising, and it's been so far. But of course, there are other levels of what influences research aside from the research institutes. And so on this little graph here that I built, there's different sort of maybe the level of impacts. On the far right, you have those levels that have very high impact and high influence on research, but pretty broad, right? So research funders, let's say federal research funders, and policymakers, that's federal or provincial governments that would have some policies onto research and how research is done and evaluated. So although this influence is very high and quite powerful, it's pretty removed from the actual research. The policies those policies and guidelines are generally not domain specific because they're so broad and apply to the whole country. So that doesn't speak directly to you as a researcher working on X at your bench. And there's some policies around open science, such as data and open access and such, but are generally, so far, have been pretty piecemealed and not sort of built as a coherent whole. Then in the middle, you have sort of universities, which also have pretty great influence, mainly maybe on research evaluation that happens at that level, tenure and promotion, really important stuff. But again, it's not domain specific. And then it's not so close to the research itself. And then at the research institute side, that's really like what my point is. That's like the proximity is there. You have all of these interacting elements that touch the researchers. And so although the influence might be a bit less than other levels in terms of its strength, it's definitely speaking to the researchers, I feel, much more. And it's enable you to tweak multiple parameters in this interacting system at the same time. So that's the idea. So now that I've talked about that and the why of the institutional model, I'll speak a bit more about what and give examples about what we've done at the Neuro, and then I'll shift a little bit to the partnership network side of things that we've implemented. So I'll kind of go through this pyramid just because I hide it there, and it's a nice model to use to organize my thoughts. So in terms of infrastructure and platforms, that was a lot of some of the focus at first at the Neuro for a reason that will become clear, but it's not necessarily the case that every institute or centers or initiative will have to build or put any resource in a lot of infrastructure, right? So as long as the infrastructure is there for open science practices, you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel and build one yourself, because there's a lot that exists already. For instance, open access journals are there with a questionable model sometimes, but that's for another discussion. Preprint repositories exist and are plenty. Repository to share data and code and so forth exists. No data versus GitHub or code and so on and so forth. And now we have these, a bit more recently, these platform that bind multiple of these elements together, data, code, data processing, analytics, such as NeuroHub and Archimedes, that enable a lot of open science practices, basically. At the Neuro, we had to build some of our own, especially at first, and well, I think it's something that even if we were going to embark on this journey now, we probably would have to do it again. So we had to build our own infrastructure to share sensitive data and samples of participants with neurological diseases. This had to be sort of local because how sensitive it is. And also because it wasn't just about sharing data, but about sharing stuff. So we needed, freezers and things to actually send samples around. And so that's where we built the CBIG Biobank. CBIG stands for Clinical Biospecimen Imaging Genetic Repository. Also often called it the Neuro Open Biobank to make it easier. And so, as I said, it's a platform that shares samples. It could be blood, urine, skin cells, whatnot, from patients with neurological diseases and healthy control populations. We also share genetics data, neuropsychology, clinical data, and brain imaging, quite a lot of it. So this is just a few numbers on it. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's grown pretty fast. Now it's 6,000 participants that are seen at the Neuro for different clinical care or follow-ups, as long as some controls. There are a few disease categories of overall 100 different diagnostics present in this database, but there's most participants are in these big categories like Parkinson's disease, ALS, MS, and so on and so forth. And so before that, researchers at the Neuro seeing patients and doing research with those patients it was just not possible for them to share any of that stuff and to practice open science with this, because you cannot just dump this on a repository out there. But now they can through this strong ethics framework that was built around it, for consent, follow-up, and such, and so on and so forth, and the infrastructure that comes with it. And that's mostly the only bit of infrastructure that we've built. For most other open science practices, infrastructure is there, and so it's a matter of supporting and training and raising awareness to the research community that these things exist. And so that brings me to this other level of user experience and communities for open science at the Neuro. A few examples of what we've put in place are, to start with, kind of low bar. These were open science best practices guides. So just on the Neuro website, we had a guide on open publishing, really sort of straight to the point, step by step, directly applicable to them and neuroscience and at McGill. And same for more recently an open data and data management guide. So this material exists in so many versions out there in the internet, and it's good to wonder, well, should I build another one for our community, or should I just point to something that already exists? And in our case, for such things, it's sometimes useful to sort of duplicate a bit of effort, do something that was already done, but tweak it ever so slightly so that it speaks directly to a researcher in your research building. So pointing to the repository of the university to share green open access, for instance. So just to lower barriers, so there's no need for them to go another step or ask more questions or send an email to find out exactly where they can share what they have in hand. Another thing we built is the Open Science Office Hours initiative that was actually started by a PhD student at the Neuro that TOSI sort of took on because it was a great idea and successful. So then when this student left, it was still it's still continuing. And so this is it's a website. It's a workshop series. So every month there's a workshop on a specific open science practice. It could be, let's say, starting to use Git and GitHub. It could be something related to a specific, microscopy technique using some sort of open source software. So it's meant to be really practical. The website also has curated resources that you can filter based on what you're working on. If you're working in microscopy or brain imaging, if you're looking for open source software or how to share data, and then can sort of point you to the right resource. And it also contains a sort of one-on-one help component where you can actually, trainees or anyone at the Neuro or assist attending these workshops can book a time with the people that gave the workshop the month before or to a generalist open science expert in the TOSI team to answer their questions. And then more recently, we have implemented this program called Open Science Helpers Program, which is very interesting. It's kind of we've adapted it a little bit. It's been running for, I think it's sort of a second iteration of it. And so the idea here is that, so we know researchers, they don't have a lot of time and sometimes lack knowledge to implement a given open science practice. Let's say building data management plans that incorporate a clear data sharing plan. And the TOSI staff is a bit limited, like at the Neuro, we don't have really, we cannot really be in every lab to help them and hold their hands and do that stuff. But there are a lot of trainees, undergrads, and grad students that do have a bit more time and are willing to learn about this stuff and are willing to get paid to do some of that stuff. And so this program is to match students, mostly undergrad, with a research lab that wants help with some research open science practice. And then the TOSI team trains this cohort of little, this little army of open scientists. And then they will go into these labs for a few months and for a few hours a week and sort of implement. And so there's a few practices that we've implemented that way. So data management plan with data sharing, publishing open access articles. So that means essentially putting articles that are closed, like under paywalled, into the McGill open access repository. So that takes a little bit of time that researchers might not want to do, but it's a fairly easy task. It's low bar. And so that way we can have almost all the papers from these researchers be fully open access. And then what was the other thing? Oh, setting up Git and GitHub in the lab, or by helping the labs get started with these tools to share code and do coding a bit more efficiently, a bit more openly. This is some examples of what has been done, and it's been very kind of win-win-win situation. That Neuro wins, TOSI wins because there's a bit more open science happening. The lab wins because they learn a bit about the process, the set practice, and they save time. And this training win quite a lot because they get sometimes their kind of early experience in the lab that they would not have received otherwise. And they get a bit of a stipend. They get paid for it. So. All right. Still in this really community side of things, there's a few committees that we've put together at the Neuro to make sure that we stay in tune with the community's need. So we've designed these principles and adopted open science as a full institute with the community on board, but that was in 2016. We need to stay in touch with that community throughout to make sure we stay in tune with what they need and what we have to offer. And so there's an open science grassroots committee that meets with us every few months. So that's a bunch of researchers, research staff, and then we discuss big ideas in open science and how to implement some of our programs, how to tweak them. Do we reach those that we need to reach? There's a TOSI trainee council that's really meant to bring open science stuff early on from the trainees and to the bottom up. And they've been pretty active. So TOSIA gives them a bit of a, well, there's a bit of a budget to build initiatives. And they recently came up with an Open Science Badges program. So that's really to encourage trainees to just get started with small open science steps. Put out your first preprint, or publish your first bit of code of software on GitHub and things like that. And it also do a lot of outreach events. So they have the journal Open Science, reproducibility journal club. There's a chapter that they've started at McGill. There's an Open Science fair where students can meet Open Science forward labs, and so on and so forth. There's also an annual Open Science and Action Symposium that we've been having for about 7 years now. Sort of a full day dedicated to open science to really hammer the message that this is something important for the institution. It offers the opportunities for researchers to present some of their open science work, trainees to present posters, and to bring international leaders, like top leaders in open science, to the Neuro to keep that conversation going. And more recently, we have this Open Scientist in Residence program, which I really like the concept and the name of it. I'm not sure who came up with it, but maybe it was me. Anyway, and so this is, I'll talk about that in a minute. I think I have a slide dedicated to that. So hold that thought, because I think my other slide was unrelated. Yeah, so I'll come back to that. But the other bit of more recent connection and community building that we've been concentrated on is patients. So that's something we've been doing a little bit less since the beginning of TOSI and Open Science at the Neuro, but now recently we're picking up speed on this. So patients are, well, the Neuro is a hospital and a research center. There's a lot of patients coming in. They're seen for care. Some of them participate in research. But we really want to make more effort to connect researchers with patients, which is not happening really naturally. So you have to design something to make it happen. And our first step here was an event called MS Connect. So that was for multiple sclerosis patient community, where there was a virtual component where people that cannot move around easily could stay at home and still participate, and an in-person component where patients and caregivers could tour the labs, ask questions to researchers, and it was really successful. And so now we're thinking about how to expand that to other clinics and units at the Neuro, and we really see this as a first step for broader involvement of patients, patient partners, and in the research towards things like co-design with patients and so on. This is not something that comes naturally to neurobiomedical researchers. It's something that we have to build in and do a lot of work for it to happen. But I think the researchers that did meet with these patients in this sort of broader outreach event really were encouraged by the engagement, really, and we want to connect with them more. So that was positive. So back to the Open Sciences in the Residence program. So we've been having this for 2 years now, so 2 residents. And the goal here is to evolve the Neuro's open science models by bringing in expert on some aspect of open science to the Neuro, to meet with the community, to work on a project, build something. And so they stay for quite a while, for about 2 to 4 months. Can be full-time or part-time. It's all a flexible thing. And so, yeah, so we have 2 residents so far. At the moment, our resident, she's here right now, actually, she's Cassandra Gould van Praag from the RCM Cooperative, or Research Community Management Cooperative. And she's really an expert on the community side of open science. How do you actually engineer, design a community for it to work? So, we've been doing all of these programs with sort of that idea in mind of a coherent community. But we rarely have the time to step back, look at all of these programs and things, and how the community is actually made, what is it made of, and how it's actually connected, for us to improve that. So she's been working on that in the little animation. It's really simple. Well, it's kind of a prototype for now, but it shows, so the big red dot is the Neuro, and then all the triangles are individual labs, and then the green dots are actually individuals that have engaged with some of our open science programs. Have they applied for a grant, open science grant, or gave a workshop in open science, for instance? That can, like at a glance, we can see, like for instance, this lab has a lot of green dots connected to it, meaning this lab is, a lot of people in this lab are engaged in open science, where other labs might not be as engaged in open science. But you can also see that maybe this lab that is not as engaged has strong connection with a lab that is engaged in open science, for instance. And so that offers an opportunity to try to sort of maybe bridge that. So if they collaborate on research, maybe they can collaborate on research practice. Anyway, so that's just a really rough sort of thought, but it's a super cool idea and a really graphic sort of way of seeing, analyzing our community and how could it be improved. There's a public GitHub repo if you want to check it out. Yeah. Oops. Okay, how am I doing for time? Yeah, I think I'm good. So moving up a level, then we're in the incentives category, which we're really fortunate to have funding to do that. And I acknowledge it's not possible everywhere. But we do have open science grants, so institutional internal grants that researchers can apply for. That's really to build capacity, take a project, maybe great data set, or great idea, great set of analysis code, and gives this extra push to make it fully open, reproducible, and so on and so forth, or to build, a more community-oriented initiative in a research domain. Sort of hackathons, for instance, or things like that. We've been offering since this onset an open access APC offset program. So most of you probably know, and especially in the biomedical domain, leading journals, high impact journals do charge quite a lot for the papers to be open access. These are APCs. And researchers are annoyed by that, especially when you tell them as an institution you should publish open access, and then they say, well, where's the money for me to do it? And then there's a whole issue around this publishing ecosystem. And every year, TOSI sort of rethink, should we still offer this little subsidy that we offer, which is $1,500 per lab per year, to help them publish open access? And we decided to keep it so far, not because we encourage necessarily the for-profit publishers charging that much, but because for a lot of labs, this is their point of entry with TOSI. It's maybe the only time or the first time they will connect with us and talk to us and talk to this open science, side, we could say, of the neuro. And so it's kind of important for us to be able to capture maybe some of them that are not involved in open science at all, but they will ask for this, and then we can engage a discussion with them. So far it stays, but we'll see how it goes. And then we also have internal awards, and that's not to enable necessarily new open science projects, but just to recognize those that do go the extra mile. And it's really encouraging researchers in open science at all levels. So, principal investigators, but also research staff, and trainees, undergrad, grads, postdocs. So every year we can have a little, celebration and prop up those that do cool open science things. Then in the incentives, we also did a bit of change to the research assessment reform, which might be interesting to that group. So we don't have all the leverage here at the NeuroEd. We're more at the departmental level, so we're not at the mega level, so we cannot really affect the whole, change the whole research evaluation and tenure and promotion process. But we do have there is annual evaluation that occurs at the department level, so we could make a little bit of changes to that. And we tackled this kind of incrementally, really taking the old ways, which was basically really asking researchers. So the example on the bottom shows kind of researchers had to kind of circle the category from 1 to 5, depending on where they're fit for publication outputs. It was the quality and quantity of publication. And basically, before it asked you, how many journals did you publish and what tier, meaning, level impact journals. So from low to high or mid to high. Then we got rid of that and instead added the notion of collaborative publications, so it can be rewarded for not only first and last author, but middle authors, which is more and more important. and also get more points, if you will, for open access publications. So those that did, wanted to go to open access and went the extra mile to publish in open access journals, or just publish in the green open access repository, did get more points. So that was small steps, hoping to move further and further along towards better research assessment. The other thing that we added is really about including things, sort of a catch-all box where researchers could list things that they could list anywhere before that were quite important, like preprints, sharing of code and data sets, open educational material, and such things. And then I think this is my last bit for the neuro, and then I'll go really fast to the network side of things. But that's also actually in development, and it's been in collaboration with Kelly and the Meta Research Program, as well as the Curtin Open Knowledge Initiative in Australia. So that's measuring open science, which is quite important, measuring practices. And so we've collaborated with them to build this dashboard. I don't know if I can replay it. So yeah, to semi-automatically extract from papers that neuro authors publish the rate of open access publication, the rate of open data and open software, and other transparency practices, including clinical trial-related transparency practices. So that's still in progress, and we haven't really done anything with it publicly at the neuro community doesn't know really this exists, or we didn't really fold it into our programs and mission, but I think it will be an important tool to just show that open science is something tangible, concrete, measurable to researchers, and it's not just sort of these end wavy principles that we put forth. Yeah. So that was sort of a glimpse of what we've been up to at the Neuro in terms of implementing open science. I do want to spend a little bit of time, although it's 12:40, on the network side of things. And so, as I said earlier, we do engage in partnerships with other institutions in neuroscience and mental health in Canada and internationally now to have them adopt similar compatible sets of open science principles, so we can work all sort of as a big network in that field. And we do that through a framework, which I won't go through in details, but essentially there's different phases where we enter in collaborations with institutes that are willing, they're sort of interested in open science, the leadership is pretty much on board, there's some champions already at the institutes, but they need support into really implement, like putting that into practice, really being more formal about it, and moving forward. And the main piece of this is the buy-in project phase, which is a 1-year process, partly funded by TOSI, where the institute will work with us and with the other members already gone through this process in the networks to obtain buy-in from the community, from the researchers and research staff, so consult them, have surveys, focus group, to really understand where they are at in open science, what are the attitudes, what are the perceived or real barriers, and what will be needed for the institute to implement and implement open science and help researchers in implementing those practices. And through this process, each institutes will develop their own tailored, specific OS open science guiding principles. So it's not a cookie cutter model. There are some like core criteria that we want to see in those principles, but it's always tweaked based on the context of the institution. And then once they go through that and they get these open science principles in place and the buy-in's done, then an institution as part of the network will get long-term financial support, and that goes to the endowment part of it. They don't get a lot of money. It's maybe actually pretty modest, but it is ensured to be sustained basically as long as they commit to these open science principles. And so it ensures that they can generally be like one staff person that gets hired to work on this open science mission, build this community. And important to know that all of these funds are matched one-on-one by partner institutions for all of these projects. This means that it ensures there's leadership buy-in as well as community awareness, so that the institute put their money where their mouth is. And so that's the state of the network so far. That's 9 institutions in Canada, and now recently we have one institute at Segal School of Neuroscience at Tel Aviv University that is now in their buy-in phase to get on board. But so all of the other are Canadian neuroscience institutes and mental health institutes that have bought in, adopted TOSI compatible open science principles, and then we work together now as a network to advance as kind of multi-institute network. If you do want to read more about the different buy-in processes that happen at those different sites, there's a few articles that I'm sort of putting up there, and I'm happy to share this as well. So you can reach out for any additional info. And yeah, so I guess so. Just to go back to all of wrapping up all of what I've said, it was sort of interesting that well, binding the network part with the neuro part in this model I'm showing here is I've been in a really kind of privileged job position where I could actually witness and work with a bunch of different institutes to implement open science principles. And what really comes to light here is that you know, depending on how this machine or this institution works as a system already or not, really dictates how easy or smooth the process is to implement open science. So those that have all these pieces that already interact and can be sort of, well, interact and are in place, do move along easier than those which these are more sort of siloed, for instance. And so that brings me to this idea of you know, the community side of thing that is now in this central open science pyramid in the middle. I really see it not as this third step, or it's not actually not a step at all, but more as a sort of all-encompassing, or it's sort of the, let's say, the ecosystem or the background on which this culture change can happen. And so if you don't have this community in place, even like the infrastructure and putting everything together will be much harder, all the way to incentives. And so the very first step that we build in the buy-in process with all of our institutions, including us at the Neuro, is actually building a community or strengthening it through the open science vision. So yeah, I think that wraps it all up. Like our plan at TOSIest first was this idea of shifting research cultures toward open science, and that's what we've been working on. But the flip side of that is we realize more and more that we actually can use open science in this common vision to build institutional culture where it was not, if it's not already there, or strengthen it if it's actually there. So that's the team. We're a small team that has recently gone some changes, so that's a bit outdated already. But I would like to point you to our OSF page for all of our slides and things, or reach out directly to me if you need anything or want more information. My very last slide is that we actually lost our dear open science community officer recently, which is Louisa here, that worked on a lot of the things that I've showed in Neuro. So if you're interested, just shameless plug, in a job that is a very unique and fun job of kind of having this playground for open science, you can hit me up. That's it. Sorry, I went a bit long here.
No, that was really perfect. Thank you so much for that. Really interesting, and even being close to the neuro and understanding sort of the principled sort of mission here, I learned to myself a lot, and then I hadn't heard of the sort of helpers. And when I had heard of them kind of in context before, I thought they were more champions, but it's a really cool concept to actually just empower this upskilling and performance of the task. Okay, so we already have lots of questions in the chat. I'd invite folks, if you're able to turn your camera on, and we can have a bit of a chat and discussion now. I see a few comments in as well as questions in the chat. I'm wondering, Christy, do you want to sort of address your question to the room? I can obviously read it out, but if you're there and able to, the floor is yours. Don't know. Okay, so it said, I'm interested in the culture change component inherent in programs like the OS Helper program or the TOSI Trainee Council. So do you want to comment on that? So she asks, do do trainees who are advocating for open science practices ever encounter friction or pushback from more senior colleagues? If so, how does Toasty navigate that? So definitely something I can relate. We've run some training programs before. We get these empowered young people, graduates in, and they're, wanting to make the change, and they go back to their lab and they're told, no, that takes too much time. So have you guys encountered that at your institution, or is it sort of mitigated by the sort of institutional buy-in?
Yeah, actually, yes, we did encounter that, and it happens. There's institutional buy-in, but there's a wide range of kind of lab-specific buy-in. We could say some of them are really bought in, some of them not so much. And actually, the trainee council and trainee initiative is a way to get around that. In a way, it's not the fact that some researchers are not on board is not a problem. Well, I mean, it is a problem in a way, but the trainee council really empowers trainees to have this community outside the lab. So they can connect with other trainees. They can do some open science stuff on their own. Like you can generally put your code on GitHub without your researchers really caring about it. Or like there's a lot of things that you can do if you have a supportive community to help you that don't necessarily need the PI buy-in. I mean, at one point, yes, you will need it, but it's not always necessary. So it's really been helpful for them actually to connect with open science with other labs that's not their own.
Yeah, for sure. And this sort of idea of like do and ask permission later. So like if you go to your PI with like, the metadata prepared for sharing your data, they see, okay, the work is done. There may be value in this. So it's a culture change from top and bottom. Okay, so others have made comments here. I don't know if I see Christy was in her car, so that's why she couldn't speak. Either Prasan or Barbara want to comment what they wrote in the chat?
If Barbara's not available, I don't mind. Thank you very much for the talk. It's very inspiring. And this open data project that you have with open specimens and things, I find it very interesting and commendable as well. And I was wondering, as far as the McGill Ethics Board goes, was it something that they were involved with at the beginning? And in Quebec, there's the Loi 25 that for us is causing a bit of issues with that. And I was just wondering if you knew about that process at all, or if there's even a template that you could offer that we could share with our own ethics board for projects like that.
Yeah, great question. So I wasn't there at the time, but definitely I've heard that it was a very tedious process. It took about 3 years to put in place the ethics framework for CBIG, for the repository, like 2.5 or something. And the McGill Ethics Board, and well, so we have McGill and we have the McGill University Health Center. So it's a complicated situation where there's 2 ethics boards that oversee some of the work doing at the neuro, depending on what it is. And they had to be involved from the onset. There were a lot of discussions, but it was positive overall. Kind of it charted this path that is now been charted for others actually at McGill to move along a bit more easily. It will depend on every institution, but I think we could share. Well, definitely the CBIG team is always happy to share and collaborate with any other sites that want to implement some of that. And so there's definitely the whole ethics framework, the governance, how it works, the constant form can all be shared for others institutions, especially. I know efforts, including those of Kelly and Archimedes, building these templates are very useful and are maybe a bit more up to date compared to ours. But since we're specifically in the Quebec context, and it works in the Quebec context, you might want to reach out to them for that. Or to the CBIG team. They're always happy. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Prasanth. And I put a link in the chat as well for some consent forms that our team's making, noting that they will be updated in the coming, I think, probably 10 days at the absolute latest. But there's a draft of some templates there that we envision could be used for ethics boards. And they were reviewed by lawyers across the country, sort of including Quebec. So there's it's meant to be a generic template. Obviously, you'll have to get approval from your local consent, but it's a starting point, so you don't have to start from scratch.
That's excellent. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Okay, there's other comments. Anyone want to raise their hand? Feel free to do so as well. Okay, well, now there's so many I can't manage them. Some positive comments and accolades. Barbara, did you want to jump in?
Yes, if that's okay. So yeah, first of all, I'd like to mention that I thought it was really impressive, everything that you've done so far in terms of putting neuro out there, in terms of open science and open research, and I really liked the angles and the projects that you all that you are working on, Gabriel. And I also noticed that you mentioned a couple of times how problematic this open access publishing is. And I'm not, we don't have time to discuss all of that, but I'm coming from the perspective of an institute which supports open science projects. I'm talking from Germany. And the point that I raised here was, I'm going to just read my question. So why not to incentivize researchers to opt for Diamond Open Access journals instead? Those do not charge APCs or any fees to authors, readers, or their institutions. I think the concept of Diamond Open Access is not necessarily well known. That's from my experience talking to people, but this should be something that could be maybe looked into to see the extent of the catalog for Diamond Open Access in neurology or any other field, to be honest. There are resources here in Europe called EDCH, so it's a community that does a lot for infrastructure, but also to give visibility to journals and then facilitate finding of these resources to research. So my question is, like, if you know what Diamond Open Access is and what's like the landscape regarding open access in this neuro field. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it's tough. So we are developing for like revamping a bit of our program for open access subsidy, where we'll actually raise a bit more awareness, like a more structured way. Like every time they ask for the subsidy for publications they had, we could point them, well, have you thought about this? Is this a for-profit or not-profit publisher? And a lot of other considerations to raise awareness. That's in the plans. Our main problem is it's that researchers want to publish in high impact journals. I'm like it's really pervasive in our field. A Nature neuroscience publication for a PI, but mostly for the students that are on it, can change their career. Like it can guarantee them almost a postdoc position or something still today. And so the researcher will come to me and say, well, I want what's best for my trainees, and publishing in this journal that's going to cost me $10,000 to do open access is what will help them achieve, like, just grow in their career much faster, and for us to be read and well known in the field. So that's still the big issue in that field. And unfortunately, I've seen it's really tough because I cannot. That's not an argument I can beat. Researchers telling me that as an open science advocate, because of course they won't change behavior if it's still something that's going to make or break a career. So it's kind of changing. It's not that bad. It's changing. It's not all bad. It's changing slowly. Some researchers sort of say no to these journals more and more, the established ones, maybe not the early career researchers, but and there are more and more options that are non-for-profit, that are still recognized as being really high quality and like good for them to publish in, because there's a readership and a community around it. But it's still the big journals really problematic for us because they're impactful.
Maybe there's like some. Sorry, Kelly.
I was just going to say I completely agree, and we've had a lot of conversation in this community of practice around responsible research assessment and shifting sort of the incentives, right, for researchers. But Barbara, go ahead, and then we'll put it to you and Vida.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the research assessment point, and also to maybe give some incentives, because there was like a slide with like some shifts of incentives, and publishing open access is one thing, but maybe they're like there's such a big difference between Gold, Diamond, and other open access venues. So then this should be taken into account. Just a suggestion. I don't know, maybe to incentivize researchers to opt for these options.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we definitely have that in mind for the future of this program. Thanks.
And then last question to you, Anvita.
Hi, that was a great presentation. I've kept an eye on the TOSI stuff, and I'm kind of in a research administrator role and trying to figure out if this is something that we can do as an institution. But I guess my question is, if I were to bring it to like senior managers, what kind of like budget would a buy-in project be? And I like what kind of ways, if there isn't budget, how can you kind of still like get senior management on board when you need to kind of like incentivize this kind of thing, right? So if you don't have the financial like ability to do that, what would you recommend as a practical step?
Yeah, so TOSI, our model for buy-in projects, this kind of standard way we've been operating, is it's $100,000 for the buy-in project from TOSI, 100 matched by the institution. So that means $200,000 for a full year project, which ensures essentially one like full-time staff to carry on the project, and funds around it to sort of implement tools at some of the cores, or like standardized pipeline somewhere, and build communications and do events and things like that. So that's the idea. Now, the way we attract leadership is by, well, providing them, well, you win 100K, you get 100, well, you have to spend 100K, but then also after that, once you go through this process, you will obtain this sort of sustained funding as long as you implement these open science principles that institute still has to match, but it's less of an amount, and it's usually kind of, well, it's a good carrot, let's put it that way.
Right, I'm going to have to jump in and cut us off. Big thank you again, Gabriel, for the time and the presentation, and for everyone for attending. Just really quickly before folks sign off, I put in the chat information about the next session in December. It's a bit of a different one where we're trying to get feedback from you guys on what you want next. And we already have some plans that we'll present to you, and then really try to solicit feedback in terms of making it more fit for purpose for what's going to actually help this community. So I'll stop there. We, as always, will have the slides available in both English and French in the recording for folks who weren't able to make it. And looking forward to connecting with everyone. And in the interim, please don't hesitate to connect if you have any questions or want to get more formally involved in organizing these sessions. Take care.
Thanks.